A few years ago, I found myself walking through the Jewish cemetery in Lodz in Poland. On one side of me were these beautiful, large, ornate gravestones with Hebrew writing, and they had little pieces of sidewalk around them in which there used to be gardens. And they spoke of a time in 19th century Lodz when Jewish people in Lodz, Poland, were clearly an accepted and a thriving community. On the other side of the path that I was on were the markers for the ghetto dead from the 1940s, from the Lodz ghetto during the Holocaust. And these were plain and looked like signs, and they all looked alike. And I thought of my grandfather and how he never wanted anyone in our family to ever return to the Poland that he came from. My father would say, "Where are you from in Poland?" And my grandfather would say, "I am from nowhere." And my father would say, "Was it near Krakow?" And my grandfather would say, "No, it was nowhere near Krakow." And my father said, "Okay, so was it near Warsaw?" And my grandfather would say, "No, it was nowhere near Warsaw." And my father would say, "Well, where was it?" And my grandfather would say, "I told you already, it was nowhere." But then, in middle age, I found myself in the Museum in Memory of the Holocaust in Battery Park in New York City. And there was an exhibit on the Jews of Galicia. And there was an old black and white film, a documentary from 1939 that Steven Spielberg had restored. It was from right before the German invasion. And there were these old Jewish men in dark gabardine coats walking through this beautiful courtyard that had a bridge between the balconies above. And then that old film footage dissolved into that place now. And there was this Jewish festival going on. And there were, on the balconies, there were fiddlers and accordion players. And below, there was this roiling Jewish mosh pit. This all ages sort of mosh pit of horror dancing below. And I said, that's the homeland. I have to somehow get back there. And I found a way through an organization that brings Jewish teenagers from all over the world back to Poland to see the Holocaust sites and to see all the old communities that were lost. And they bring rabbis, and they bring doctors, and they bring psychologists, and they bring educators like me, a teacher who doesn't know much about the religious sides of Judaism, but could teach the cultural parts to the students. So I arrived with these kids, and we were on these buses. And the Jewish organization sponsoring us did not want us to eat any Polish food. They provided us with completely kosher food made in Brooklyn. It was horrible. All around us were pierogies and kielbasa, and we were eating these prepared meals from Hasidic Brooklyn. On this trip was the world's perfect security guard, a Polish Catholic man named Tomek. He wore mirrored shades, and he always stood like this. And he wore fatigues with cargo pockets on them and white t-shirts. And he was tattooed up and incredibly tough looking. And he was such a perfect security guard that there were times when I would think, oh, Tomek's nowhere around. And as soon as I ever had that thought, I would look over, and in some corner, there he was. Perfect. The tour I was with was very paranoid about being in Poland. Part of Tomek's job was to take stickers and put them where the gas flap closes to make sure no one tampered with the gas flap on the bus, and to put stickers where we put our luggage on the bus so that that door would not be tampered with, or if it was, he would know it. Now, usually we all ate as this big group, all the students, all the teachers, all the rabbis together. And Tomek and the Polish Catholic guide would eat together by themselves at a separate table so they could speak Polish while we spoke English on the main tables. But I wanted to know Tomek. So I went over to his table one evening at supper, and I didn't know what to say. I was taught a few greetings in Polish, but I know no Polish, and Tomek knew very little English. So I said, "You like pierogi?" And Tomek said, "Oh, yes, I like pierogi." And I said, "You like bigos?" And he said, "Yes, I like bigos, but I can't eat too much or I become bigos." And suddenly, this friendship seemed to spark up, this friendship where we couldn't communicate so much by language. And he reached into his cargo pocket and he pulled out a thing of Turkish coffee with a paperclip, and he said, "You no like the instant coffee I've seen." And I said, "You're right. You're right." And he said, "Every morning you come see me, I'll give you the Turkish coffee." And so every morning we had our Turkish coffee together at breakfast. And when we arrived in Lodz, outside the Grand Hotel there, on the ground, is sort of like, it's like the Grumman's Chinese Theater Walk of Fame, but it's all Polish filmmakers. Agnieszka Holland, Roman Polanski, Krzysztof Kieślowski, and some actors, all their names with stars on the sidewalk. And I was looking at these and I was really impressed by them. You know, I was the president of the Failing Film Society at my college, so I was like really excited to see all these Polish filmmakers be celebrated on the sidewalk. And Tomek said that, and he said, "Oh, you like Polish film, right? It wasn't just the pierogies. You like Polish film?" I said, "Yes, I love these Polish filmmakers from the Lodz Film School." And he spoke to me of a film called The Promised Land that was special to him, as far as I could understand, because it was about a Lodz that he didn't know, an older Lodz, a turn-of-the-century Lodz, and it was about the friendship between these three industrialists, and one was a German, and one was a Polish Catholic, and one was a Jew. He said, "You must see this film, Andrzej Wajda's film, Promised Land." And that was this connection to us. I said, when I go back to the States, I'll go to Best Video, and I'll get Promised Land, and I'll watch it for you. So that day we were in the cemetery with the very ornate graves from the 19th century and with the markers for the ghetto dead was a day of incredible ghostly events. There was a mother of a student who came with us, and she somehow felt called to a part of the cemetery where those ornate gravestones were, and she read in Hebrew the name of her great uncle. The graveyard was closed that day. We had no map. We had no way of telling these things. She was called to a place where her knowledge of Hebrew let her realize that this was where her great uncle was buried. That was the kind of day it was. And as I walked up this path, I finally came to the main attraction in this cemetery. It's an enormous mausoleum, a huge house, the largest Jewish mausoleum in the world, and it's to an industrialist who died in 1860 in Lodz named Poznański. And I looked up and I was just overwhelmed by this, right? This place where all the Jews were wiped out, and those who were still around in Poland were expelled in 1968. But here in this place, in this graveyard, was the most spectacular grave I had ever seen, almost like the Taj Mahal, to this man Poznański, to a different time in Lodz. And while I was standing there awestruck by this sight, I felt a presence behind me. And I heard Tomek's voice. And he said, "This is my history too, Mr. Saul. We share this history." And I never looked back to see his face. I just kept looking at Poznański's mausoleum. And it was that feeling when you and someone else are looking at the same point on the horizon, it's almost as if you were looking straight at one another. Thank you.